Good morning, and thanks so much for joining us. We're set to get started in about 5 minutes. If you haven't hopped over to the Learn page, it is linked on your screen to get the supplemental and background materials for this event. And if you are joining us, know that you don't have a microphone that you can speak in, but you certainly have a chat window. And we'd love to hear where you're joining us from and maybe what the weather's like in your area. Again, we'll get started in just under 5 minutes. Amy, there's not a call-in option. We don't have a phone bridge for this event. We do have a YouTube stream, but that may not help you with your computer. Maybe you can grab some headphones so you can hear better. We'll try to talk loud so you can hear us, Amy. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. We're scheduled to start in about 3 minutes. If you want to grab that last cup of coffee, hot tea, or run down the hall real quick, we'll get started here in about 2.5 minutes. Hello and welcome. Whether you're joining us in our interactive webinar platform, in our YouTube stream, or in a recorded session, we are so glad you're here for today's webinar, Polishing Our Protective Shields. Exploring Ways to Protect Youth from Violence. Brought to you by the Family Development Concentration Area of the Military Families Learning Network. I'm Jen Sheelick, Webinar Coordinator, and I'd like to call your attention to the link on the slide and in the chat window in the bottom left of your screen. learn.extension.org/event/3330. That link will connect you to slides, handouts, and other event materials available for you now in the live session or later at that URL. The Military Families Learning Network is part of a DoD-USDA partnership, and our passion is to connect military family service providers and cooperative extension professionals to research and to each other through innovative online programming. We'd like to take a minute to learn more about you, so we'd ask you to please complete this quick poll to tell us a little bit more about your affiliation. If you would pick from these options your current employer, the best way that you can describe it. If you choose no vote or other, let us know in chat if your option doesn't look like it's available to be chosen from here. We'll give you a minute to fill this out and to choose from the list of current employers the one that best represents yours. And as folks are filling this out, you can see the diversity of the different participation groups of the folks that we have joining us today, and we're so excited to see you all. Okay, let me go ahead and go back to our slide and back to our content. Thank you so much for taking the time to fill that out for us. Let me turn the microphone over now to Barry from Family Development to introduce herself and today's presenters. Barry?
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everybody. I'm Barry Sobelson, as Jen said, and I'm the Programming Coordinator for the Family Development team. We'd like to thank all of you for being here today. We're excited to see all of you. Here at Family Development, our focus is on family strengthening, early intervention, and family violence prevention and treatment. Our programming is designed for individuals in the mental health, family advocacy, and education fields. Throughout this webinar, you will find our Family Development team members joining in on the conversation and sharing resources. We will be the ones using the purple font. If you would like to check out all of the amazing programming we have, our team member Jason will be providing the link to our webpage in the chat pod for you to explore at your leisure. There you will find upcoming and archived webinars, blogs, resources, and our podcast series, Anchored. Anchored can now be found on iTunes. The link is available in the chat pod at this time. Not only do we offer CEUs for our webinars, but we also offer them for some of our podcast episodes. And speaking of CEUs, if you're interested in obtaining some for today's webinar, there will be an opportunity to obtain 1.5 hours. There will be more detailed information at the end of today's webinar on how to receive your credits. As usual, our team has worked diligently at preparing some great additional resources to complement today's webinar. If you've not done so already, please check those out on the Learn Event page where you registered for this event under Event Materials. Also, throughout this webinar, you will see Jason from our Family Development team providing resources for all of you in the chat pod. Again, his font will be in purple. I am honored to introduce you to our facilitator today, Dr. Lauren Marlotte. Lauren is the Assistant Director of Training for the Division of Population Behavioral Health and Nathanson Family Resilience Center at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is also an Assistant Clinical Professor in the UCLA Department of Psychology and a licensed clinical psychologist. She completed her postdoctoral fellowship at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, where she specialized in working with adolescents and their families. Her work is focused on prevention, stress, trauma, and resilience. If you would like more information on Lauren, Jason will be providing you with the link to her full bio in the chat pod. So at this time, I would like to turn things over to Lauren.
Thanks, Barry. That was a wonderful introduction, and I just want to express my gratitude to the MFLN for setting up this presentation today. as you can see from my bio, I'm very passionate about working with children and adolescents and their families, and this topic is near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to see how many people are here who also have an interest in these areas. So what I'm going to be covering today are kind of three broad areas of violence that impact children and teens. I'll be talking first about bullying and strategies to minimize bullying behavior. Then we'll shift into talking about relationship violence in teens and strategies that parents and teens can use to identify violence, and some strategies to prevent getting into violent relationships. Then we'll spend some time talking about promoting recovery after school shootings. Since those are three very broad topics, I'll kind of be giving the highlights of all three. But what will really tie the three of them together are talking about overall risk and resilience factors in individuals, but mostly taking a family and a systems approach. And we'll talk about ways to build resilience in families, including some resources, and I hope that all of you have some tools to share with us as well. So first, let's talk about what bullying is. Bullying encompasses a wide variety of behaviors. Sometimes it's used interchangeably with teasing or picking on, but it's a little bit different. It is an unwanted aggressive behavior. It's with generally children, but I mean adults can absolutely be affected by bullying as well. Today we're just going to focus on children. And there is some sort of power imbalance, even if it's child-to-child bullying. Then the last criteria is that the behavior has to be repeated or the potential to be repeated over time. And what I'll spend some time today talking about is both kids who are bullied and the bully may have serious lasting consequences. So I'm going to be emphasizing physical and emotional bullying. There's, of course, cyberbullying, but in the interest of time, we'll just talk about the physical and emotional bullying, not to minimize the impact of cyberbullying, just to pick out highlights. Researchers have found that adolescents with close ties to the military are actually more likely to be victims of bullying, harassment, and specifically physical and cyberbullying. Now, we don't know exactly why this might be, but given that this is a military-specific webinar, I thought I'd bring that up just to start to think about some ideas of those unique stressors that military teens and children might be experiencing. Things like deployment, frequent moves, having to constantly have re-engage socially, maybe not always picking the right social groups, for a wide variety of reasons, and maybe for some reasons that I haven't mentioned as well. So we're going to actually bring up a poll, and first we're going to talk about physical bullying. And physical bullying is hurting somebody's body or possessions, things like kicking, hitting, punching, spitting, tripping, that kind of thing. But it's also breaking somebody's property, being mean or rude, or having mean or rude hand gestures, throwing bits of paper at somebody, making physical threats, putting a note on somebody's back are all considered physical bullying. So in this first poll, we're going to ask you to just take a guess that in their lifetime, what is the estimated percentage of children and adolescents age 0 to 17 who experience physical bullying? And with this poll, which I believe needs to be brought up by the MFLN folks, yeah, you'll just go ahead and click one of those dots. What's your guess at the percentage of children and adolescents, again, age 0 to 17, who experience physical bullying? Is it 15, 25, 35, or 50%? And we'll just give you a couple of seconds to fill that out. All right, so it's looked like people are leaning towards the 50%, and then we also have a good number of folks who are in that 35% range. Surprisingly, you all are overestimating the amount of physical bullying. It's actually about 25% of children and adolescents who will experience some sort of physical intimidation. Um, uh, Overall, with physical assault that's not considered bullying, the number is closer to 55%. So that may be something that influences our thoughts on this. So thank you for participating in that. I think I can go ahead and end this. All right. So now let's think about relational or emotional bullying. These are things like teasing, name-calling, taunting, social bullying, purposefully leaving somebody out, embarrassing somebody in public, or spreading rumors. And again, this is aggressive in nature. There's some sort of power imbalance, and it's repeated over time or has the potential to be repeated over time. That's true for all bullying. So for relational and emotional bullying, I'm going to do another poll here just to think about what percentage of children and adolescents do you think are impacted by that? The options that will be pulled up are 15, 25, 35, and 50%. And if the poll doesn't appear, we can utilize our chat pod. If people just want to go ahead, oh, here's our poll. The dots on the left, thank you for those of you who are being so quick to respond. Again, people are leaning towards the 35 to 50%. Kind of thinking about the children and adolescents that at least mental health folks work for, which is the lens that I'm coming to this discussion with, is we probably see a lot more children and adolescents who've experienced any kind of bullying, so that can also kind of put a spin on our perspectives. Great, so we have an even split between 35 and 50%, which is always fun. Unfortunately, in this poll here that is not a competition, but it's just interesting to see what it is. For a relational and emotional bullying, this is actually 50%, 51.8% of children and adolescents who've experienced this type of bullying. And it's more common in that I think there's a lot more types of behaviors that could go into that. So that's just our first poll. Thank you for those that were able to participate. We'll have some more polls, and we'll also have some opportunities to engage in discussion in our chat pod, so be prepared for that. So one of the strongest predictors of later mental health problems for children is peer rejection. And I think on one hand, that can help children set up their social support networks, and if they're not able to develop those pro-social behaviors, they have a much harder time of making friends and having meaningful relationships in their future. Teens who are actively rejected are at the highest risk of having mental health problems, and then in turn are often teased or bullied. It's also a predictor of juvenile delinquency and early withdrawal from school. Children who are bullied are at a higher risk of other consequences, such as the ones listed here: anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress symptoms, having lower self-esteem, physical health problems, difficulties with sleeping and eating, and then poor academic achievement, school participation, and attendance. Some of that being directly because of bullying, wanting to or having children refuse to go to school because that's kind of their coping mechanism. Now, many of you may be familiar with this, but I will just point out that military children are already at a heightened risk of bullying. They are also at a heightened risk of using marijuana, cigarettes, and alcohol. They're actually 45 to 73% more likely. And whether or not that's directly correlated to bullying, I can't say, but teens who are bullied are more likely to smoke, drink, and use drugs. So by Bystanders are a group of children that are often not addressed in the bullying conversation. So bystanders are somebody who witnesses the bullying. Some bystanders are unhelpful. They might actually instigate the bullying. They might encourage the bullying. They might then turn into the bully. Most kind of just passively accept the bully by watching and doing nothing, and without even realizing it, they are contributing to the problem, which is why I'm bringing it up today. There are a small subset of bystanders who are actually helpful. They might intervene or go get help or do something like that. But oftentimes kids will say things like, "It wasn't my business, I'm afraid of getting hurt or becoming a victim, so I might as well join the bully." They might also feel the powerlessness compared to the bully. They feel like the victim might deserve whatever kind of bullying is happening. They don't want to draw attention to themselves or fearing retribution. They think that telling adults won't help or will actually make things worse. Or a lot of times they just don't know what to do. It might be behaviors that is surprising to them, and they're kind of in shock that their friends are behaving in this way. But bystanders also suffer negative consequences. They have a greater likelihood of substance misuse, mental health symptoms such as depression and anxiety. They also have a greater risk of poor school attendance and a greater risk of feeling powerless or guilty for not acting. So then let's talk about our target population of a lot of bully prevention, which is the actual bully. So as I mentioned before, bullying is about power, and power is something that children don't naturally have a lot of, seeing as they have parents and caregivers and teachers and coaches kind of constantly telling them what to do. So it's something that they seek out. So some kids will use bullying as a way to enhance their social power, to become more prestigious in their social groups. They might use bullying to deflect taunting and aggression that is directed towards them. So kind of, in a sense, a form of self-protection. So children who tend to bully tend to be friends with other children who bully. They tend to travel in the same groups and encourage children to behave in that way. They may actually be natural leaders in their social groups, and though they tend to be less cooperative and engage in fewer pro-social skills, such as helping behaviors, there may actually be some underlying strengths that in interventions can be used for good instead of towards negative aggressive behaviors. So children who are bullies are at higher risk of engaging in violence and other risky behaviors later in life, which is why it's really important to intervene at an early time point. Like bystanders, they are at risk of substance misuse later in life, being involved in delinquent behaviors, dropping out of school, perceiving a negative school climate, and that may be something that actually encourages the bully to continue with their behaviors. They're more likely to carry a weapon, have earlier sexual activity, be convicted of a crime or receive a citation, and later in life be abusive towards their romantic partners and children. So this is a question, it's going to be a scenario, and I just want you to think about what type of advice would you give in this situation. And I'll ask you to use the chat pod to write your answer. The scenario is you have an 8-year-old son, you pick him up after school and he's in tears. He tells you that boys were making fun of his new shoes and he was embarrassed in front of his classmates. And he says, "I feel so silly, I just don't know what to do." So what would your advice be? Would it be A, just ignore them, they're going to eventually stop. B, walk away when this happens. The quicker you get out of earshot, the quicker they'll stop. C, act like what the boys didn't bother you, acknowledging that it's okay to have feelings around that. You just don't show it to those boys. And then D, you tell your son, tell an adult right away, this is not okay to be treated this way. See lots of D's, a couple of C's, D's. First do B, then do D. Great. This is very representative of what adults often tell kids to do. Go get help. You were made fun of, that's not okay. And if you ask children, does this work? They will tell you no. Adults do not give very good advice about bullying. I think some of it is we try to use our adult brain, and adult types of bullying may be combated in a different type of way. But for children in verbal teasing, the best answer is actually C. So even though it doesn't directly get help, it is something that will, in the long run, minimize the bully's behavior. So saying something, instructing your son to say something like, whatever, and then walk away. The key piece here being that the child needs to say some sort of comeback and then get out of the situation. So even if it's really distressing and he got a new pair of shoes and he thought that they were great and he's new in school and then gets ostracized in front of a group of students, and it is hurtful and embarrassing, the best thing for your son to do in this situation, like I said, is to do some sort of comeback and then get out of the situation. This is important that it's not teasing the bully back. It's just acting like what they said had no impact. Because again, bullies want to get power and control out of the situation. And the power that they get in this situation is having a group of classmates laugh or giggle or cheer them on. One of the potential comebacks is saying, whatever, like you're really bored. Acting like what the bully said was really stupid or lame is another way of managing this. Giving some sort of short verbal comeback to convey that the child doesn't care. Something with lots of dramatic flair, if that suits the personality, saying whatever, or yeah, and your point is, I'm supposed to care, things like that, and then getting out of the way of the bully so they can't come back with something else. Now, another option is giving a nonverbal comeback. Some tweens that I work with are great at rolling their eyes, so I encourage them to use them in this type of scenario. Roll their eyes and walk away, shrug their shoulders and shake their head no. As a parent or as a provider, if this is happening to a young person that you're working with, giving some of these tools and strategies and having them practice. I see that one of the questions that's coming up is, telling the child the idea that holding and hiding feelings is okay. Now, what I'm saying is, to the bully, you're holding and hiding your feelings. Now, is it okay to express your feelings to a trusted adult, a trusted friend, a parent, a caregiver, a sibling, something like that? Either, right away or later on around the dinner table that night, that is the time then to express those feelings. We'll talk a little bit in the school shootings section of this about, actually also in the teen dating violence, about questions that parents can do to elicit those types of feelings. But that would absolutely be something for a trusted adult, a caregiver, a good friend, to encourage the child to express, but you don't express it to the bully, because then you let the bully know how much of an impact that has. So one thing I'll say about relational bullying is that this actually tends to peak during tween and teenage years. Physical bullying does tend to decline. The teasing is frequently done in front of onlookers for the purpose of the discomfort of the victim. Kids who are seen as withdrawn, physically weak, rejected by peers are easy targets for bullying, and socially rejected children and teens tend to get upset and angry and physically aggressive, which then in turn gets them in trouble and or feeds the bully to continue over and over again. All right, so I have 3 of these scenarios just to kind of think through. I appreciate everybody's feedback. So this is another one where I'll ask you to engage in the chat pod. Your tween daughter tells you there are rumors about her father, who's currently deployed and was deployed when your family moved to your current PCS, is absent. Your daughter says, I don't know what to do because no one's saying anything to me directly. If they did, I would explain it. I just hear people whispering, and my friend said that other people were talking about me. You suggest, A, act shocked that anyone cares or believes this rumor. B, confront the person, coach your daughter to confront the person that your daughter's friend said was gossiping about her. So, approach this person, say, hey, I heard you were talking about me. C, coach your daughter to try to think of another way to disprove the rumor, such as posting regularly on social media about how much she misses her dad, who's in Afghanistan and is on a very important mission, so kind of talk up the pride that she has. D, have your daughter appear upset and hurt and show that to the folks who are spreading rumors about her, and the kids will be empathetic towards your daughter. So with this one, I see A, B, and C so far. It's a good variety because at this point, after our first one, you probably won't be surprised to hear that adults are not very good at advice about emotional bullying. Just wait for a couple more responses to come in. Lots of A's and B's and a couple C's. Well, here again, our instincts might be, to hedge this off and have a conversation, especially since this is a tween. They typically have the social wherewithal to have more mature conversations. But the actual correct answer is A. So even though this doesn't directly get at the rumor and dispel it from the person spreading the rumor, this is the best way to stop the person spreading the gossip and the rumors. So it's important to remember that rumors and gossip are another type of relational bullying. We don't tend to think about this because it's pretty common in girls. There's not always a malicious intent with gossip and rumors, and the purpose is getting attention, feeling important. It's typically not done with a mean spirit, intent to hurt others and get revenge. That's more of the rumor part of it. But it can be, and it still can be very hurtful. So adults tend to say, try to disprove this rumor, get upset, or confront the person, and those things aren't going to stop the person from gossiping. So acting amazed and surprised that anyone would believe or care about the gossip, it does 2 things. It denies that the rumor is true, and then it also makes it seem silly. So acting amazed or saying something like, I can't believe anybody would think that. Can you believe anybody actually cares about that? Another way of saying this is people seriously need to find something better to talk about. It kind of minimizes the impact. And here again, this may have an emotional impact on the young person, and it should absolutely be explored in that safe place and not in front of the person gossiping of what those feelings are like, and not to minimize that emotional impact. Spreading rumors about yourself can also dispel the rumor. It can directly discredit the importance or believability of the rumor. So this might sound pretty absurd, but let me just walk you through the steps and it might start to make some sense. So spreading a rumor about yourself acknowledges that the rumor exists. So your daughter might say to her friend, have you heard this rumor about me? And then it discredits and makes fun of the rumor. How lame, it's so stupid, it's so ridiculous for words. Then acting amazed that anyone would believe or care about the rumor. It's amazing what some people believe. So it kind of puts down that there would be any believability about this. People seriously need to get a life and find something else to talk about. Then the new rumor then becomes how stupid that the old rumor was. Okay, we'll talk through one more scenario. Your child tells you that some kids at school trip him in the classroom and he's been shoved in the hall. He's an average-sized kid and gets well with his friend group, so you're pretty surprised. Your son tells you that it's been happening since the beginning of school, but you don't want to get involved, but doesn't want you to get involved. What should you do? Should you tell him to confront the bully? Should you tell him to use teasing comebacks? Should you have him invite the bully to sit at his lunch table? Or D, avoid the bully? What's kind of your natural instinct? And this is a form of physical bullying again. So we talked earlier about emotional bullying and gossip and rumors, which is a type of emotional bullying. So I'm seeing D's and A's, one C, D's and A's, one C, one B. Yeah, I think our natural inclination is to either use some of these strategies from different types of bullying or to confront the bully. And that is going to actually increase the physical bullying. The important thing I'm trying to stress with these three different examples is that there's three different ways of addressing different types of bullying. The strategies that I've talked about for teasing won't be effective for physical bullying and can, in fact, lead to more bullying. So it sounds perfectly reasonable as an adult to want to report the physical bullying and engage directly with the bully. If the child is in danger, absolutely they should report the bullying to an adult. And I realize that's not one of the options on here. I wanted to take that out of the equation. But in this situation, this is a milder form of physical bullying, and it's hurtful and upsetting, and it's certainly not acceptable types of behavior, but it's also not putting this child in grave danger. So in this situation, the actual right answer is to do everything they can do to avoid the bully. If it crosses over into a line where it's physically dangerous, then adults absolutely need to get involved. If anything, these other strategies could actually make things worse for bullying and may result in retaliation against the child. So avoiding the bully, if he can't find you, the child can't get bullied. Laying low, keeping a low profile, and not being noticed is one of the strategies. A lot of the times, this type of bullying is done out of earshot and eyesight of adults. So especially for younger children where there is more monitoring, encouraging a child to be close to an adult or at least be within eyesight of an adult during free time like lunch and recess and that kind of thing. Using teasing comebacks could actually be provocative to the bully. That may give them fuel to their fire. It may end up in a situation where the child feels the need to fight back or push back or something like that, which could then in turn get them in trouble for being aggressive, even though they weren't the ones that started it. Not policing the bully and telling them what to do. If it does become dangerous, allowing an adult to do that. Having, if there's a friend group that tends to associate with the bully, thinking through with your child ways to create new friend groups. And as I've emphasized, but I will re-emphasize that if there is a dangerous situation, that this is a situation where an adult should get involved, but these lower level types of physical bullying can mostly be avoided by avoiding the bully and not provoking or having a reason for a bully to pick on somebody, not instigating them by using teasing remarks or that kind of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about bullying prevention before we move on to our next topic. Many programs address the bullies, where I've spent a lot of time today also addressing what the victim can do. This is a big topic where we could get into a lot of different prevention strategies, but I imagine what most of you are hearing about is from the victim side. There's a wide variety of school-based bullying prevention programs that have been implemented, but they're not always evaluated very well. There is some emerging research that says that these zero-tolerance policies are not effective, and that there are suggestions for school-based programs to incorporate elements that are promising in the research. So things like having a multi-tiered system of support. So universal approaches where there's activities that all youth within the community of school or school participate in. There's selective interventions for groups that are of youth that are at high risk of being involved in bullying, and then there's prevention interventions that are tailored for students who are already involved in bullying. There are things called multi-component programs that address multiple aspects of bullying behavior and the environments that can actually support, usually inadvertently, the bullying behavior. Examples are examining the school rules, using behavior management techniques, promoting social emotional learning in the classroom. This is something where I do a lot of school visits to see how one of our programs is being implemented in a classroom in a small group level. And I see a lot of differences in the way that teachers promote social emotional learning. If they promote using feeling words or checking in on a comfortability scale, or if teachers are a little chaotic and it's clear when they're stressed out that their students get stressed out as well. School-wide prevention activities are things like improving the overall school climate, strengthening supervision of students, and having a school-wide anti-bullying policy. Supervision of students is even important in the later years, even though teens don't need as much supervision. Sometimes having those positive adult interactions, improving the overall school climate through being friendly, saying hello, having the principals and vice principals be present in the hallways during passing times. Sometimes very small, very little time can be invested to make a big change. Having a school-wide anti-bullying policy has been shown to be helpful, but it's just the zero-tolerance piece that has not been helpful and not very effective. Involving families and communities, so taking a systems approach to this, engaging parents and caregivers in talking about how to talk about bullying and recognize the signs of bullying, both from the child being the bully and the person being bullied, and getting involved in school-based prevention efforts. So developing a long-term school-wide approach that strengthens the youth's overall social-emotional communication and problem-solving skills. So these are kind of some basic resilience skills that hopefully I'll have time to get into some specifics on that at the end of that. So I know there was a lingering question about bullies engaging in early sexual activity. And this is an interesting correlation that I don't think we can say, one causes the others. But my best explanation would be that kids who engage in bullying are at higher risk of negative consequences. So being negatively influenced by their peer groups, having less parental supervision or involvement, making choices that teens are still developing the frontal lobe, the centers of their brains important in decision making and thinking things out. They may be more likely to be impulsive and make reckless decisions. So that's just kind of a guess of why those two things might be correlated. They're certainly, we don't know anything about one causing the other. So before I move on to some teen dating violence pieces, if there's any lingering questions on bullying, I will take them now. And of course, at the end, I'd be happy to take more questions as well. I really appreciate that comment, Amanda. Bullying doesn't go away as we become adults. We have more tools and experiences and skills to deal with issues as adults. But you're absolutely right. There's certainly bullying behavior that happens in adults. And today we're talking about kids, and these strategies can hopefully help kids who are bullies not be bullies when they're adults, but these might be behaviors that you also recognize as an adult. There's a question about this might be difficult for children with developmental disabilities who have trouble with social skills, even in the best situations. How would we advise them to handle the situation? Would a bullying social story be a good option? This is fantastic. So I attended a training by Elizabeth Lageson, who developed a curriculum on social skills for children with autism. And she writes in her manual, especially the nonverbal teasing comebacks are sometimes the most difficult for kids with developmental disabilities. In particular, she works a lot with kids with autism, where they may not have the same spatial awareness about what an eye roll feels like or looks like, or their face may end up making a face that they're not intending to do when they're trying to look standoffish. So absolutely doing a role play, a rehearsal. I'd say starting with a social story and seeing if the child is able to also apply this to their real life as well, to make sure that they can make that leap. I even think this is a wonderful thing to do as a prevention strategy. There's lots of ways to have conversations about bullying, even if it's not an issue that comes up. So let me just address one more question, and then we'll move on. How often is it a lone bully, and how often do they have backups in their bullying? So typically, bullies will pick on students who are vulnerable, which would mean that more often than not, oh no, you're asking about the actual bully being lone, which is actually having backups. Since the bully tends to want to get attention and some social notoriety, I think there's typically people who are around, and there might be one kid who's the instigator or the primary bully, and they may be able to suck other people into what they're doing, rather than having typically a group of kids decide to be bullies altogether. There's typically a leader with others who are either bystanders or occasionally jumping in. I will come back to some of these questions hopefully at the end of this, and if not, we can definitely include it in our follow-up as well, because I think you're really generating some wonderful questions. Let me shift into teen dating violence, which encompasses physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner. Overall, how many adolescents in the United States do you think have been a victim of any kind of abuse from a dating partner? And the poll that will pop up will say 1 in 3, 1 in 5, 1 in 10, or 1 in 100. Already off to a close start. It's definitely a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention, which is why I think it was a popular request for this webinar. I think it's a topic that we think about happening to only adults, and not realizing that any age youth who's in any kind of romantic relationship has the potential for it to be an abusive romantic relationship. So it looks like most people are thinking 1 in 10. In a close second is 1 in 5, and in third place is 1 in 3. And the answer is actually 1 in 3. So surprisingly to me, this rate of a type of violence far exceeds any other types of youth violence. And I'll get into it a little bit in a couple of in the next slide, which is that I think it's really turning into an epidemic, but also a silent epidemic because it's not something that is regularly talked about. So girls and women between 16 and 24 experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence, also known as domestic violence. I'll refer to it as IPV. Perpetrators of IPV who were abusive in adolescence tend to also then perpetrate more severe violence as adults. Violent behavior typically begins 12 to 18 years old, which is much younger than most people would think. Only a third of teens who were in a violent relationship ever told anybody about it. So that statistic on 1 in 3 is a guess, and it could underestimate who is in an abusive relationship at some point. Now, this also encompasses emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. So there's a wide range of behaviors that this statistic is getting at. Most people think that they would recognize the signs if their child was in some sort of abusive relationship. However, research has shown that 60% of parents and caregivers who were quizzed about warning signs could not identify the correct warning signs. Over 80% of parents believe that teen dating violence is not an issue, or they even admit that they don't know whether or not it's an issue. And I think most importantly for this talk is that most parents haven't talked to their teens about teen relationship violence. I'm going to read a quote from Jenny Willoughby, and she is an adult, but she was in the media recently as being Rob Porter's ex-wife. Rob Porter is a former White House staffer, and Jenny Willoughby decided to write a blog in April called Why I Stayed about her experiences. She says that being strong with excellent instincts and loyalty and smarts does not inoculate a person against abuse. It doesn't prevent her from entering into a relationship with an abuser. Abuse often doesn't manifest itself early on, only later, when you're in deep and behind closed doors. The really ugly side of Rob's, my ex-husband's, abuse only came out after we were married following 3 years of dating. So I want to emphasize that it's not always apparent from the beginning of the relationship and this behind closed doors piece. Somebody can put on a totally different face to the public as they can in their intimate relationship. So her blog has become a safe digital space for people to share their stories, to share support, for survivors and spouses who've been trapped in abusive circumstances to kind of have this outpouring. And she published it a little less than a month ago, and it has 443 comments. So I think it's pretty impressive of, you know, what a platform this has been for people to share their story. Now I will point out that I'm being very careful about my pronouns here. Some of the materials kind of classifies men or boys as being the abuser and girls or women as being the person who's abused. And I want to acknowledge that women can be abusers, and I also want to acknowledge that this also happens in same-sex couples the same way it does in heterosexual couples. So that's why I'm being very careful of using either them or saying him or her. So let's talk about some warning signs of abuse. Some of these are going to be very obvious, but some of them are just going to be little signs and symptoms that as you're working with families or in your own families, just want to raise a tiny little hair of suspicion for some of these smaller, less obvious things. And then say again that the relationship doesn't always start out violent, but the violence that starts after two people have known each other for a while. The big exception is forced sex or date rape or acquaintance rape. Forced sex can sometimes happen the first or second time when two people go out, and especially when one person has very little dating experience, they're at high risk of this, or they might feel intimidated to say no. So some of these warning signs are checking cell phones, emails, social networks without permission, insisting on having passwords, insisting on having access to phones and iPads and that kind of thing. Showing extreme jealousy or insecurity, constant belittling or putting down, having an explosive temper. Again, that might not always be obvious. It might be something that's only shown in certain ways. Having isolation from family or friends. So, if you notice that your son or daughter is more distant, you're not hearing from them as much, you're not they don't see their friends as much, that's a big warning sign. The abuser may act very differently in front of family and friends, appear very charming and friendly, and might appear demeaning and full of rage in front of the partner. The abuser may make excessive accusations, have constant mood swings. Of course, physical pain or injury is a sign of abuse. Possessiveness, telling a partner what to do, including what to wear and how to act. So these might, kind of be a hard line to see what is a compliment, what is a suggestion, and then what becomes abusive in terms of being very controlling over what somebody wears. So telling a partner things like, you caused me to behave this way, or no one will ever love you the way that I do, is also abusive behavior. And then, of course, I mentioned date rape and acquaintance rape, but even pressuring somebody to have sex or engage in other sexual acts without consent later on in the relationship is still considered abusive. So, as I've mentioned, this is turning into a silent epidemic. Teens don't report dating violence, and why might that be? There's probably a lot of reasons. Surveys conducted with adolescents demonstrate that they hold attitudes that normalize abusive or controlling relationships. For example, many teenagers might think that jealousy or possessiveness or even violence are signs that their partner really loves them, that they're a normal part of the relationship. About half of high school girls and 75% of high school boys believe that forced sex is sometimes acceptable. So I am summarizing from that research that sometimes teens don't know that the behavior is abusive, or they sometimes think that abusive behavior is acceptable under certain circumstances. Now, there's probably also situations where the teens are embarrassed or ashamed. They might justify the relationship because there are good parts of most abusive relationships. And they might also feel trapped in the relationship. So young relationships might be, oh, this is my first relationship, or oh, I can't believe that I'm finally dating this person, or this is the person that I'm meant to be with. So they feel like they're stuck in that relationship, even if it's not a financial situation or a housing situation. There might be other reasons why they feel trapped. So what can young people do? And then next I'll talk about what parents and adults can do. So knowing the signs of an abusive relationship, having the young person ask themselves, if your friend told me about this type of behavior and that you were experiencing, would you say that that was acceptable for your friend? Or would you think that your friend was in a healthy relationship? And that's often easier for teens than to do a self-examination. Encouraging teens and adults to take their instincts seriously, to listen to themselves. If they feel like something is wrong, somebody is being abusive, trust those feelings. There may be symptoms such as being anxious, having problems sleeping, changes in appetite or weight that your physical body may be telling the young person that something is wrong, but it may also be a cognitive process of this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel good. When I'm with this person, I don't feel good most of the time. And encouraging teens to pay attention to that internal awareness and pay attention to their body symptoms as well. Encouraging teens to value themselves and love themselves and know that when they are hurt physically or emotionally, it's unacceptable. Speaking up and finding support and help. Having these be a part of normal conversations in schools, with parents, as a part of extracurricular activities. For teens, if they think something is wrong, letting them know it probably is, encouraging them to speak up, and letting them know that violent behavior doesn't just disappear on its own. Somebody doesn't just decide one day, I'm going to stop being abusive and things get better. It's important for teens to know that they need to talk to somebody, a trusted adult, a close friend, to get an objective opinion and also to get help. All people, teens included, tend to need help to get out of their abusive relationships. So what about caregivers and other adults? I mentioned over 80% of parents think that they could recognize the signs of dating abuse, but most really can't identify them when actually given a list and asked to identify which ones are abusive. So first and foremost, parents, educators, caregivers, trusted adults can talk with teens about developing healthy, respectful relationships. Ideally, this can start before teens ever start dating. Parents sometimes get very uncomfortable talking about that, thinking if they bring up topics like this will promote them to either start dating or be in an abusive relationship, and that is absolutely not true. Parents and significant adults in youth lives can model healthy and respectful relationships themselves. Either in their own relationship, they can talk about relationships in the media, they can talk about relationships in the family. If there's families that are going through separations or divorce, you can talk that through, especially with teens who can understand more of the intricacies and complications that go into romantic relationships. There's questions that parents can kind of be asking teens on an ongoing basis. These are conversations that can happen around the dinner table or while families are taking a walk together. I tell parents, start with something general like, how are things going? And if this is new for the parent to check in with the teen, it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, or the teen might come back with an attitude of, why do you want to know now? And letting the teen know that the parent is genuinely interested in how things are going and what their life is like. Then asking about friends' dating relationships, asking if their teen has seen or witnessed any type of abusive behavior. This is your chance as the parent or the trusted adult to define what you think abusive behaviors are, what you think violence is, and compare the definition to your teenagers. So you get an assessment of what they're thinking about and if they think that any of those definitions are different than yours. You might ask questions like, why do you think one person would be abusive to another when they're dating? Why might a person stay in an abusive relationship? And what makes a relationship healthy? Even if there aren't examples that are close to home, there's more and more examples in the media in the face of Me Too and Time's Up and talking about those type of social political movements and integrate those into your everyday conversations with teens. It's really important for parents to know the signs that they might see, even if the teen is denying that they're in an unhealthy relationship. So if the teen apologizes for the partner's behavior, makes excuses for them, loses interest in activities that they used to enjoy, You see them becoming more isolated. You hear that your teen's partner calling them names or putting them down, acting very jealous, very controlling, the teen casually mentioning any kind of violent behavior but laughing it off as a joke. Those are all serious symptoms that you should figure out a way to tap into that. If your teen is not willing to talk to you about that, see if they're willing to talk to anybody else about it. And then even signs of multiple unexplained injuries or explanations that don't make sense. Don't brush those off, because even if they're not a sign of intimate partner violence, they may be a sign of self-injury or some other medical condition. Then some other discussion questions for parents are, what can you do if a friend is threatened or abused? What kinds of messages about dating, abuse, or relationships do you see in the media? Where can people go for help if they need it? Is there resources at school? Do you feel comfortable coming to me? Is there somebody else you feel comfortable going to? And just letting the teen know that this door is open and that this is a conversation that is important. I'm going to give you one resource because I think it's very accessible to teens, and this can also be a resource as a provider, as a parent, to give to teens just as a prevention. Hey, I want to let you know that this is something that is available. It's called Love is Respect. There's a website where there's a chat feature. There's a phone number for people who are old school and like to make phone calls, and then there's also a texting option as well. So one more quote from Jenny Willoughby's blog, which you can tell I was very moved by, is that it's not the responsibility of the abused to come forward and force a shift in our cultural understanding of domestic violence. The onus is on society to shine a light on the societal problem and demand a change. We need to stop sensationalizing abuse in the media and Hollywood, because it's more nuanced than that. We need to stop avoiding discussions of abuse in schools and in the workplace, because it's more prevalent than that. We need the knowledge of abuse to lead to swift and just action, because it is as serious as that. We need to talk openly and honestly about why our culture continues to tolerate abuse. We need to recognize that if anyone is susceptible, everyone is susceptible. So this is why it's so important to have these conversations at multiple levels, within families, within school systems, within community organizations. So I see a lot of great chat. I'm going to try to quickly glance at it before moving on into school shootings to see if there's any questions that should be addressed at this point. How do we counter the culture of meanness and name? Oh, that goes back to the bullying piece as well. So we'll try to have some time to answer that. So the loveisrespect.org website also has some great resources as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on in the interest of time to discussing kind of the aftermath of school shootings, and not even try to tackle the prevention piece here. I really appreciate this image, because I think it just shows, the young age of the children participating in these drills, and that they all know what to do, and this has been just kind of integrated into our school systems, and is something very different than when many of us on this webinar today went to school. We had drills for natural disasters. We didn't have drills for school shootings, but this is a part of our children's school culture now. So just to give you a sense, between 1999 and 2017, how many children experienced a school shooting? So not that they were shot, but they experienced it in their school. 25,000, 110,000, 135,000, or 170,000. What's your guess? Ooh, it's a tie between 110,000 and 135. this is how I felt about the statistic when I looked it up, is that I wasn't quite sure what the number was, and I think that's being reflected in our spread. Um, the Oh, goodness. Polls are being updated. The 39% of you that guessed 135,000, you are correct, but I feel the same way, that this is a statistic that we hear about it in the news, and it's a relatively new danger that our children are being exposed to, but I didn't really have a sense of how many students had been exposed. And to me, 135,000 sounds like a big number. This comes from an ongoing Washington Post project exploring childhood gun violence, and it draws on incidents that occur in schools from K through 12. The figure does not include kids who've witnessed or been a part of gun violence outside of school. And up through 2017, the estimate was 164 schools across the country have recorded a school shooting on campus in these last 2 decades. What that means for providers and parents is that we need to be prepared for when this happens, how to support our children. And not even when this happens at their school, but when our children hear about this on the news, on the radio, on social media, what are ways that we can support them and have open conversations without making their anxiety and concerns worse. So first, as my through line for many of these skills, is start talking and keep talking. Ask your child what they already know about the incident. And if it's a shooting incident or a violent incident that didn't occur at their school or even in their state, still ask them about it. If they've heard about it, it's probably impacting them. Model use of feeling words like sad and scary, and encourage children and teens to use their feeling words as well. The underlying message when you're communicating with children is, it's okay if these things bother you. We're here to support each other. The child may or may not have questions. Some kids have a ton of questions, and some will have none. But try to see what they already know if they're willing to share a piece. And if they're not, it may not be the right time. Try again at some point to just check in with them. You want to provide information to answer their questions when you have the information. If you don't have it, that's okay. You can say that. But when you have information, don't say something too vague, like something happened far away from here and some people got hurt. Even for a 6-year-old, that's too vague and a little abstract and very confusing. So you answer with accurate information in an age-appropriate way. So again, for a 6-year-old, if there's a school shooting, you don't have to get into the history of guns in the United States and the Second Amendment and states' rights versus federal rights, these complicated issues around guns and guns control. But maybe with a teen, you might have a deeper conversation, and you might get into some more facts about the situation. Being direct and factual offers reassurance. So again, if you don't know the facts, that's okay, but try to provide accurate information. And if your child reports anything that's not accurate, correct them in simple, clear, age-appropriate language. Be mindful of stress symptoms, and children and teens will display their stress symptoms differently. Remind your child about safety. So coming back to, we do things in our everyday lives to stay safe. And you might remind them of things like, we wear seatbelts when we're in cars to stay safe. We wear helmets when we ride bikes to stay safe. For our military families, you might say something like, our service members put on their protective gear like their boots and their helmets, and that's how they stay safe. And you reassure children that there's helpers like police officers and firefighters who also help us stay safe. So you're not minimizing the impact of the school shooting, but you're saying there are protections in place to help keep everyone staying safe. In the immediate time after a shooting, limit media exposure. It's not good for kids, teens, or adults to hear the same reports over and over and over again right after the event. So for young children, you might not expose them to media if they're not reading and not regularly watching the news. For teens, you might want to watch the news together. Now, ideally, you record it ahead of time. You preview it. You see if it's the right level of depth of material and that it's not overly graphic. And then you watch it together and you have a conversation with your teen about the media. Or you read an article together and you have a conversation about it. You also discuss ideas for coping. When you're able to do so, trying to make some meaning out of something positive that happened in the midst of the tragedy, such as the first responders being quick to respond and protect people, to how scary events can empower people to become engaged and advocate. For kids and teens that are aware of the teens from Parkland, I mean, they've started a major national movement pushing for gun control. They staged the walkout, the national walkout last week. There was the town hall that was on CNN, various protests. I mean, they are really making an impact out of a very tragic situation. Being patient with children, with yourself, it can, take time to start the healing process. It can take time to start to have these conversations or ask questions. Children might show some troublesome behaviors as they're adjusting, difficulties with concentration, attention, or expressing themselves, and that's okay. As a family, getting back to routines as much as possible. These are stabilizing for children and adults. It can make the environment more predictable when trying to process grief and other types of feelings. But if your family routines are all thrown out the window, maybe there's one or two that you can add back in. I remember when the students from Parkland went back to school. Initially, they were just going back to school. There were no backpacks. There were no notebooks. It was just, let's get back into the habit of going back to school since it's been closed for so long, and then slowly integrating back into a regular school day. There's some really wonderful resources on the National Child Traumatic Stress Network website. They even have a link for funding school crisis recovery services through the Department of Education, so I'll just plug that here before going on to some risk and resilience factors. So I don't immediately see any questions about school shootings. So if there's anything, this would be a good time to type them in and I can get to them once I go through some risk factors for stress reactions. So I mentioned, children and teens express stress in different ways. Kids might show more physical symptoms like headaches, problems with sleeping, stomach aches. They might experience regressive behavior, meaning that doing something they've grown out of, like sleeping in their parents' bed. They might regress on toilet training. They might regress on their speech. Teens may show their feelings in terms of anger, irritability, having an attitude, being in denial, or sometimes increased risk-taking behavior. So it looks a little bit different on different ages. Now, risk factors for having stress reactions and having ongoing stress reactions include things such as the extent of exposure, how much the person thought that their life was in danger, for kids if they were separated from their parents. So you can see why there's a big negative impact on school shootings because parents aren't typically there when they happen. The degree of pain that was experienced, if the person experiencing the event has a lack of social support, that's a big risk factor for having stress symptoms. Prior trauma and behavioral or emotional problems also are risk factors. Post-traumatic adversity, such as economic hardship, marital strain, put somebody at increased risk. So if they're already under a lot of stress, another stressor tends to exacerbate that. And a parent's traumatic exposure and parents' traumatic stress symptoms also can negatively impact the child. So now let's move on to what actually helps support recovery. Supportive relationships with parents and adults. So don't minimize your impact if you're not a parent and you're a provider or providing support in other ways. As a positive, supportive adult in a child's life, you are one of these factors that help support recovery. Spending time together as a family, this reestablishes that sense of safety, establishing routines of spending time together. Authoritative parenting, where the parent's not overly permissive and also not overly dictator-like. Children with at least one secure attachment figure, having these routines and rituals, participating in activities, having a network of support. Now this might be a community network, a social organization, a religious organization, but it could also be a supportive family network. There's lots of different ways to gain different types of support. Helpful beliefs and meaning making. This may come a while after the event. Being able to see that there were positive pieces of, as I mentioned before, the first responders responding very quickly. There may be some meaning making out of deciding to volunteer time or services in appreciation of the assistance that happened, or we're experiencing rain here today in Southern California and potential for mudslides. And I know somebody who was impacted by mudslides and then decided to become a Red Cross volunteer because she was so appreciative of the efforts that the Red Cross had put forward in previous disaster situations. And then promoting emotional communication, which I have some tools in a couple of slides to help facilitate that and explain what I mean by that. So if there's any questions about this school shooting piece, I'm also curious if any of you have any go-to tools that you use, if you want to put them in the chat pod to support resilience and recovery. And if not, I'm going to share with you a couple of my favorites. So I work at the Nathanson Family Resilience Center at UCLA, and we have a variety of websites, which I'll share with you at the end of this presentation. But one of them is called focusfoster.org. And that is a website that has foster care resources, and it also has a wide variety of tools and resources that are not specific to foster care. So one of them is this handout on noticing strengths. I love using this handout with teens, families, children as a jumping off point when I'm just starting to get to know them, because oftentimes they're coming in for services because something is wrong and something has happened and they want to fix it, to get better, whatever it is. So I definitely want to hear about that and their goals and that kind of thing, but I also want to hear about the things that are going well. So the strengths in the friends, the family system, and the individual family members as well. One of my go-to emotional communication tools is our feeling thermometer. We use a simple scale that even young children can understand. We talk about the green zone as being comfortable, the red zone as being uncomfortable, yellow zone is just a tiny little bit uncomfortable, orange zone is getting pretty uncomfortable, and then the red zone is the most distressed you can be. You can also use the numbers if the colors are not jiving with clients and families. But the nice thing about this is even young children can understand that system. And the more families practice this, the more they can have communication with one another about how they're doing and what they're experiencing. And this is something where on a day-to-day basis, everybody goes up and down the feeling thermometer all day long. And where you're going to start to notice signs of stress and distress is when kids are reporting consistently that they're in the orange and red zone and that it maintains over time, and there's very few things that they can do to help get them back down into the comfortable zone. Thank you, Rachel, for mentioning a relaxation toolkit that focuses on the 5 senses, a relaxing smell, sight, sound, etc. That's also one of my favorites. And Jim, you correctly identified this as focus. This is the Families Overcoming Under Stress model, which is an evidence-based practice used with families and groups that is a formalized training, but these are free resources that anybody can have access to. So thank you for reminding me to point that out. The feeling foxes are some of our favorite tools to use, not only with children, but sometimes even adults can relate to the proud fox, the sad fox, the yucky fox, which is one of my personal favorites. This also ties the facial expression with the feeling, and then these also can be then linked back to how comfortable or uncomfortable are these feelings on the feeling thermometer. Managing stress reminders is a nice handout to be used as a part of a discussion on reminders of stressful, traumatic, or loss experiences. I know this is a little bit difficult to read. I promise you when you print out the PDF, it is a little bit easier to read. There are things like increasing awareness of how your body feels. So here, when you're in the orange zone and you're feeling sad, what is it that's going on inside of your body? Oh, I get a headache, I get muscle tension, and that's how I know that I'm in the orange zone here. Allowing time for timeouts, using relaxation techniques, engaging in positive self-talk, having good self-care such as getting enough sleep, enough exercise, eating healthy. Surveying your skills of things that have happened, if you've used in the past, and strategies that have worked, and thinking about how they can be applied in the future. Getting support from others and planning strategic distractions around certain stressful situations or events. This is a script on deep breathing. It says deep breathing for children, but I actually think it's a great script for children of all ages, including adults. It just gives an outline of how you might guide a child through the beginning, like a intro to noticing your breath. If you have your own go-to deep breathing scripts that you like to use, there's nothing novel about this approach, but it is just one simple, short way to utilize that technique. This is a handout called Effective Communication Skills. It talks about things like active reflecting, paraphrasing, active listening, asking for clarification. I find this handout to be as effective using it with parents as with children and teens. Oftentimes parents will say, yeah, I listen to my child. Yeah, I encourage them to ask questions. And then I ask a little deeper about what does that look like. And they, sometimes have some hard times engaging in some of these effective communication skills with their children, also sometimes with their partners as well. So this is just kind of a sampling of some of the tools that can improve those resilient skills of emotional regulation, emotional communication, other types of communication, and some tools that can perhaps be put into your toolbox. Another tool for your toolbox is making sure that providers, parents, families take care of themselves. So these are tools and skills that you can help use as a service, and also recognizing that taking care of yourself is one of the best ways to polish your protective shield so that you can be the best functioning advocate, therapist, teacher, provider, parent as you possibly can be by making sure that you're taking breaks, you're getting enough rest, you're filling up your cup in different types of ways. So I want to thank you all, and this I will go back to some of the questions that I wasn't able to address earlier. These are some of our tools and websites, the Division of Population Behavioral Health, the Nathanson Family Resilience Center, the Focus Project, which is our, on some military bases, we have some focus resilience trainers where you get to do even more in depth on these resilience skills. Here in Los Angeles, we have a Veteran Family Wellness Center. We provide services from using a family lens on the site of the VA campus, and we also provide telehealth services as well. So I wanted to put that link up there as well. I want to go back and just kind of glance through some of these questions, comments. I know there was some that I was unfortunately not able to get to. I think there was a question with bullying about the freeze response. And I really appreciate bringing up when a child is under stress, they may experience fight, flight, or freeze. And that's why having some sort of preparation to coach children through using these skills can help them with those fight, flight, and freeze responses. Sometimes just acknowledging that that's the way that our brain and our bodies respond to stress can help children understand why they might experience stress in a certain way. So maybe what they do is they silently take a breath, and then they use one of the teasing comebacks when responding to relational bullying, or they take a deep breath, and that's when they, walk down the hallway the different way from the bully who has in the past engaged in some physical bullying behaviors. But that practice and that rehearsal of the bullying strategies paired with the practice and rehearsal of some of the emotional regulation strategies can kind of be paired together to be able to use those strategies to the best of the child's ability. I'm just looking back to see if there's other questions that are popping out. If there's some that I haven't answered, I'd also be happy to take a couple minutes now. Oh, I really appreciate this comment, Jane. Sometimes the term abusive to a teen doesn't resonate with them as they don't consider what's going on in their friend's relationship as being abusive, possibly breaking it down into some defining, controlling, jealousy, isolating from friends. Yes, so using specific examples, sometimes it lands a little bit better to say healthy versus unhealthy, acceptable versus unacceptable. If there's other types of words or language that you're hearing from your teen, using their language can be very helpful. I agree with you. We have a trauma clinic here, and we see a wide variety of families. And I've had families experience some very traumatic situations, and they're constantly comparing themselves to other people, saying, well, I don't have as bad as this situation that was in the media, or I didn't experience this type of situation. So they may not actually consider themselves trauma survivors. So then if they choose to not identify themselves in that way, I don't push that. I talk about the stress impact of their experiences that they have had and allow them to use their own language around that while acknowledging that what they've experienced is going to have a large impact on them. But if there's certain words that don't resonate, that is absolutely fine. That is an excellent question, Lori, about specific curriculum that do work. I will make sure to address that in our follow-up blog as well. There isn't one that kind of hits on all of those points, but there's some that have been better addressed than others of trying to be more universal and incorporate parents and teachers into this as well. So the resources are on focusfoster.org. They are under the tab that's called Resources. The Feeling Foxes and the Feeling Thermometer, there's a bunch of free resources there. All of the PDFs are not specific to foster care, and for those of you that are also working with foster care youth, there are some specific resources to foster youth, such as videos and other types of resources. So I want to thank you all today for your participation and interest in this topic. I think they're all very important in working with families, taking a prevention lens of promoting these types of conversations and decreasing stigma around these topics. So thank you all for the work that you do and your participation.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining us for this really important webinar, and thank you to all of our participants as well. If you did have questions that you were unable to ask, please feel free to put those in the chat pod as I wrap things up. It looks like some of you do have some questions, and we'll look at them and get any of the questions that didn't get answered during the webinar and provide you with responses through a blog that we will publish very soon through our website, and you can find it on social media as well. And if you're on social media, we encourage you to connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. And don't forget about our podcast series that I mentioned at the beginning. It's called Anchored, and it's now available on iTunes. In each of our episodes, you will find us talking about real-life struggles and topic areas that many families encounter and practical solutions to lessen the ripple effects. So if you haven't already, be sure to get anchored with us. If you are a licensed social worker, professional counselor, or family therapist, and you're interested in obtaining CEUs for today's webinar, or if you would just like a certificate of completion, please focus your attention on the current slide or on the chat pod. You will need to take an evaluation and a post-test, and the link is provided on the slide and in the chat pod at this time. We will be providing 1.5 CEUs for today, and while there are a few states that may not recognize these particular CEUs, all participants are strongly encouraged to check with their state's licensing rules to confirm reciprocity and CE rules. If you have any problems accessing the evaluation or the post-test, or any questions for us regarding these CEUs, this webinar, or any other programming, please feel free to email us at mflnfamilydevelopment@gmail.com and to look on the Learn event page for more details about this webinar. Our next webinar is on Thursday, April 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Dr. Thomas Britt from Clemson University will be talking about the determinants of mental health treatment seeking among military personnel and interventions to increase the percentage of military personnel seeking that treatment. You can register today for the webinar at the link provided on the slide and in the chat pod at this time. We hope that we will see all of you there. Also, if you enjoyed our webinar, then be sure to check out MFLN's other concentration areas programming. You will notice that many of them also provide free CEUs to their participants. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our future webinars. At this time, I will pass things back over to Jen. Jen?
Thanks, Barry. Those of y'all who are packing up and grabbing last URLs and typing some more information into the chat pod, we'll stay open a little while to allow you to do that. If you, before you step out, if you'd like to give our presenter Lauren a round of applause, you can click the little person holding their hand up and go down to the applause button and give her a virtual round of applause for sharing her insight and her wisdom and her passion with us today. We really appreciate it, Lauren. And thank you to Barry and her entire team for putting together this incredible online learning opportunity for us today. We do invite you to explore the other learning opportunities that we offer and share them with friends and colleagues. Remember that our events are not only live but recorded as well. We hope to see you in another webinar or in our podcast series soon. Have a good day. We'll leave the room open for another few minutes, and then you can exit when you're finished collecting your materials. Thanks again.